fact, does it 16? Now, in case you're wondering what a formula might be, if you know the number of bits in your system, the number of levels that you can get from those number of bits is 2 to the n. Check it out. 2 to the 1, that's just with 1 bit, you get 2 levels on and off. 2 to the 2 is 4. That's the 4 that we had over there. And with the 3 switches, 2 to the 3, okay, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8, right? So it checks out. And 2 to the 4 is 16. 2 to the 5 is 32. 2 to the 6 is 64. 2 to the 7 is 128. And 2 to the 8, our old familiar 256. Okay? Now you keep going down that line, 2 to the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and you end up with quite a few levels. Okay? CD is 16 bits equals 2 to the 16 levels, which is really a lot. It's like 65,000. Anybody know? I don't know. I'm not much of a math fan. That's why I do calculus in 2 weeks. So you can get on with it. But whatever that number is, it's like 65,000. It's quite a few. It's quite a few. 65 little levels that we chop, 65,000 levels that we chop one waveform into. And now, we've got really precise, watch this before your very eyes. I'm going to digitize this waveform to 65,000 levels. There's the 32,369, 41,252, and 0. So, there you go. Will you take that waveform over all the others? Yeah, I think you will. You will say, hey, that sounds pretty darn good. In fact, there's a thing that we call the difference between the analog signal and the digitized one. If you subtract one from the other, what are you left with? Has anybody ever done that little mental exercise? Let's take the crude one. If I took the real analog waveform and subtracted off the digital version of it, I would just have, let's see, it's going up and over, and then it goes down, then it comes up, and then it hits the down thing again, comes up again, and then it's doing this as it digitizes, and sometimes it's at 0 and it's perfect. Sometimes it's above the waveform, sometimes it's below the waveform. But this is known as the error signal. Okay, that thing. The error signal. Now, if I just took that and copied and pasted it into a digital workstation and hit the play button, what do you think that would sound like?
Static.
Static is a good way to put it. I like that. Static. Hiss, sometimes known as pink noise, white noise, pink noise. You know? It's just noise. Now, as I increase the number of bits and make the error smaller, and I'm only off by a 65,000th, what happens to my noise?
Less.
It's less. So guess what? The original analog signal plus this error signal is what we end up as the digitized signal. So it's like we were adding noise to the original analog signal when we sample it. Okay? It is the mathematical equivalent of adding this random noise to the original analog signal, and that's what we get as a result of sampling it. We have errors, and those errors sound like static. Hiss. Okay? Believe it or not. So the finer your resolution, the less hiss you add to your analog sample. Okay? That's ideal. So when they came out with the DVD, what did they do to improve the noise? Okay? What did they do to improve it? Yeah. DVD is 24 bits. which is crazy millions, right? Crazy millions of bits. I don't even know how many millions. A lot. 32 million or something.
16.
Is it 16 million? Okay. 16 million and some odd, dot, 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 that I don't really care about, but that's a lot. Okay? That is so much better. It's 256 times better than a CD player, the noise floor, in theory. So, wow. We should all be switching to DVD for listening to our music, don't you think? I think so. In fact, I have a little demonstration here that I think we rigged up, didn't we? And it's ready to fly. Where is that? If it was,
I didn't drop it on the desktop.
can you find it for me? Oh, here it is. Resample CD. Okay. I need to teach you a couple other things, but I'm also going to let you know. There's over the past, let's say 50 years. It's about right. The loudness of our recordable music has increased. Started with old Tommy Edison here, recording everything acoustically, and he noticed he could get a pretty loud recording to play pretty loud in somebody's living room just by singing very loudly into a horn, right? Well, when electrical recording came about, and in about the 1940s, a term called compression came about, and it gave the ability to smush the music, the peaks, a little down. He was able to take the peaks down into the regular parts of the main music bed so that you make the entire piece louder. Okay? Do you understand that? What a compressor does? There's a peak, the snare drum hit. Wow. If I make it as loud as I possibly can on my CD by a process called normalization, okay, then those snare hits are robbing me of loudness. The loudness of but if I put a compressor on there that smushed the music down, okay, and it smushed those snare drum hits so that they were more like that, but not clipped off, not rudely clipped, but we'll smush them down to those little heights there. Then you could see that I could make the whole thing louder, back louder, and then the bed of the music would be louder, and there would be the peaks. Okay? The music bed is louder, there's the peak, but the whole music is louder. And so the music would be, well, louder. And we all know louder is better, right? So coming back 1966, the Beatles had heard that The Who had the most loudest rock and roll record ever. And so they had to go, they're not going to have the loudest rock and roll record, we're going to have the loudest rock and roll record. And so they told the engineer to put a microphone in Ringo's kick drum. And he said, "Are you crazy? That's a $3,000 microphone. You don't put those in a kick drum." And he goes, "Well, the Beatles, that's what we do." So we did, and so they put the kick drum for the first time in 1966 into Ringo Starr's bass drum, and got huge, huge sound. And they released it on a record called Rain. And the flip side of it was a more popular record called Paperback Writer, first time. And that was the loudest record that anybody could turn on their little Close and Play 45 children's turntable, and it would be louder than any other record in your collection. Therefore, would sound better than the Rolling Stones, wouldn't it? Who said, "We can't have that. We've got to have the loudest rock and roll song." And so the next year, the Rolling Stones come out with the loudest rock and roll song, and then so does The Who, and Paul McCartney reads about it in the press and says, "That's absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to make the loudest, most rockiest rock and roll song ever written." And he came out with Helter Skelter on the White Album. Helter Skelter is the loudest song ever recorded, of course, right? Until, of course, 1971's Rolling Stones comeback, which had to be louder, right? And because all the record companies were convinced that louder is better, and people that listen to it on the radio if it is louder on the radio, that it would probably sell more records, right? So the Americans kicked in on this and started putting their records out louder. And the quote, and you can look this up on Wikipedia or anywhere on the web, the loudness wars began. Okay? And then we hit digital, baby. And we don't have to have a tube amp or anybody's mom watching over our shoulders or some engineer telling us what not to do. Because when we went digital, all you had to do is write an algorithm that smushed this harder so that it wouldn't go over this line. And then you have this brick wall of sound. Absolute filling in every space. And it's loud coming out of your CD player. You ever notice some of your CDs play louder than others? Did you notice that? Okay, it's due to this phenomenon. And it really is right now in the halls of the Audio Engineering Society. This is what we call the bane of the studio engineer's existence. Because everybody wants their record to be louder than the last one. And it's finally getting to the point where the loudness is so obnoxious, okay, that it's destroying the dynamic range, the sound of the record. The one that took the biggest hit recently was Metallica's Death Magnetic, which was touted as the worst sounding album ever by some critics. Okay, and they took the hit for it in the press, especially the engineers anyway. And that was sort of like the beginning of the end for the whole let's make it louder philosophy. But that brings up the point of how we can get away with murder in compressing our sound so that it will fit into a smaller space, onto a smaller thumb drive, onto a slower streaming device by various means of compression. Now, this noise that we introduce by sampling, just by the process of sampling, can be mitigated by a louder signal. It's loud, we don't notice that was introduced at 16-bit CD sampling, right? However, during the horn solo of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, you know the oboe guy in the middle? He's usually the Weasley guy in the orchestra that sits there in the middle going, you know? And they never have two oboe players because you can't keep two of them in tune, right? So it's just one little Weasley guy in the middle of the orchestra that played right after the cannonball shot, right? Da 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 dun dun. Boom! So you have a waveform this huge, and you have so you're limited. You got to turn the recording levels down to take on the cannon, but now you have this little oboe in there, weaseling away, with only 16 bits to cover them. No, it's not 16 bits, honey. The cannon's up here taking up all those 16 bits. Here's the oboe player. And he's being represented by, I don't know, what appears to be 3 or 4 bits in comparison to how small the signal is. So is CD, is compact disc good enough for classical music? The answer is no, it really isn't. Which is why we had to come up with the DVD. Classical music will show the flaws of the CD recording system. And I'll prove that to you today. Okay? So, as we go from modern music to less than modern music, I'm going to go from late, or turn of the century kind of stuff. Not that turn of the century, but the recent one. And play you American Hi-Fi piece. It's very loud. I'm not going to touch the volume controls on the amplifier. I'm just going to leave them alone. Okay? But you'll notice as I go back through the years and back all the way to classical music, which is not recorded with compression at all, or the Sony record label executives will take you out into the parking lot and shoot you. Okay? No compression on classical music. It's a no-no. And by compression, I mean this stuff, not data compression. Okay? So let's listen to a couple pieces. I'll introduce you to Flavor of the Week, and then we're going to do it to 8-bit. Be 16-bit, and then I'll play it back at 8-bit. Okay? Which is a lot noisier. 16-bit, 8-bit. And we'll see if we can hear it. Okay, now what I'm going to do, let's see. Alright, 6. Here's 8-bit. 8-bit. Okay, so, could you tell a difference? A little bit? Not much. Sounded pretty good, didn't it? That was acceptable at 8-bit. Let me take you back to 1980, 81, Canadian band. I played keyboards with them, so I have access to the mix tracks, because I had to get on stage and play keyboards. This is a group called The Kings. Had a #1 hit record in Canada. It's called Switchin' to Glide. And immediately it's a little cleaner, a little more dynamic range. That keyboard. Yeah. Yeah. Now, let me play you the 8-bit version of that. Truck 12. Sounds okay. Sounds pretty good though, right? Let's see if we put on classical music, how things change. Let me pull up the 5th of Beethoven, Beethoven's 5th. He must have been quite drunk after an entire 5th. So, I've not touched the volume controls. $16-bit. All right. 8-bit original, track 18. Ready? Listen. You hear that? Ew. Are you serious, Wiz? You say? Yeah, I am. Let me turn it up now so you can hear it. Now that there's no compression on the music, I can turn it louder and do this to you. Now normally the loud music will mask that hiss. And it was indeed masked in the 1980s, Switchin' to Glide. When it went to CD, you couldn't tell. You know, and you could cut the number of bits down and put it on your iPod if you want, just by having the number of bits, and you won't notice it. In fact, modern day, if you really want to cut, if you want to triple, sometimes quadruple the number of songs you can get on an iPod, cut it down to 8-bit. Just shove it into one of your digital processors and turn it to 8-bit. You won't know the difference. There'll be a little extra hiss, but that's all mixed up in the extremely loud sounds because it's all compressed. But dare do that to classical music, and you're going to have classical aficionados all over your back. PBS has it all the time. Their #1 complainers are classical music aficionados. That's where they get all the letters from. The sound of last night's performance of Rigoletti's concerto was absolutely awful. I will discontinue my membership in PBS if this kind of crap continues. Signed, Sir Arthur. All right? So, I don't mean to over-pompousize those types of people, but But I did a little, yeah. But, you know, let me just give the case in point now. Remember we talked about the, you know, the poor oboe player. If he's playing in a symphony that has a very loud dynamic range, he truly is going to be playing in these little wiggly waveforms. And even with 65,000 samples on there, you know, we still have to take care of all of these, you know, and by the time you get down to these 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, it may be a 5-bit signal. We may be sampling that oboe with only 32 levels. It looks like this thing at the microscopic level. So you know what I did for you? I went down, I took the CD, I ripped it, and I took the oboe solo and I amplified it. And it sounds horrible, even at 16-bit. So let me play you that. Again, I will play you the normalized version, which is track 20. And this is where it normally is. You hear that? That's horrible. But I'm going to amplify that so you can hear it. Resampled. It's pretty awful, isn't it? Yeah, so we need 24 bits to capture the little oboe solos and the quiet nuances of the orchestra when they're setting off a cannon, okay, next door, okay? Anybody ever seen 1812 Overture? Performed live? That's fun. That's fun. There's 2 concerts I love to go to. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, because I love to see professional, high-paid musicians sweat it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 1, they're changing key signature. And they're going, where am I? Where am I in this piece? They're sweating. Any Stravinsky piece is well worth your money to go see, play it at any orchestra, just for the amusement quality. The other one is 1812 Overture, okay? Because you get to hear cannons go off. And they do this in an annual event up at Deer Valley with the Utah Symphony. And all these guys come out, they have collector's cannons. And they line 18 cannons along the side of the street there. And they set them up right at the appropriate time in the piece. And it really is quite amazing. So 1812 Overture is indeed the most dynamic range piece ever written, ever, okay, by Tchaikovsky. And it's extremely difficult to capture on digital medium unless it's 24-bit. So you got to go 24-bit, okay? HD, right? Okay, we're going to talk about another completely separate concept, but totally related to sampling. That was called bit depth. And the next one I'm going to call sampling rate. Okay? And there are 2 different parameters of digitizing, but they have 2 completely different results on how they sound. Okay? This one is called sampling rate. So, you can put that down in your book. Sampling rate. That means what? What does that mean? What does it mean? How fast I sample, right? Right? Because the other thing we haven't talked, we talked about how accurately I can sample, how many different ways, you know, how many different slices I slice the pie into. Very crude ones are very accurate ones. CD, 16-bit, or 24-bit, or very crude 8-bit. Okay? Now, we haven't talked about how quickly I should sample any given waveform. If I sampled one spot here, and I made the next spot here, and I named the next spot here, would I capture that waveform? Is that good enough? It really isn't, is it? Because what do I get when I put them all together? No, not the same note. I get DC. I get nothing. That ain't a note. That's a line. That's a dead animal. Okay? That's your little EKG thing. You just died. Okay? Because you didn't sample it fast enough. Oh! Gee, we thought Grandma died, but her heart was just beating twice as fast. And we weren't sampling it quick enough. Oh, God. Big mistake. Okay? So how often do you think I have to sample this waveform? Obviously, more than once per period, huh? Right? Guy named Nyquist, this dude said, okay, it's Nyquist sampling theory. He says you must sample at least twice the frequency you are trying to recover. And play back, you know? What are you trying to recover from this? Okay? Obviously, this sample rate ain't gonna cut it. So Nyquist says, well, why don't you double it then? Twice. Okay, all right. If I put a dot in between every other one, I suppose that might help. Does that capture the waveform? Yeah? Yeah, kind of. Kind of pretty good. Not too bad. So, we sample. Does anybody know the human range of hearing? What is that? What is the range of human hearing? Yeah, it's 20 hertz, 20 vibrations per second to 20,000 vibrations per second. Okay? That's for an average young human being. Okay? If you've been to lots of concerts in your life, you've probably lost the 20 kilohertz. Okay? If you're over 35, you've probably lost the 20 kilohertz. If you're male, it's even worse. Typically, it is said, statistically, that women age more gracefully than men, but we all knew that, right? Typically, for a given 40-year-old woman, she's going to hear better than a 40-year-old man. That's just a statistic, but nonetheless true. And we usually lose the high end. It's the high end that we lose, not so much the low end. So this starts to creep down. And if your teacher is above the age of 35 or 40, of course, all the kids in the class, the young teenagers, they know that they can communicate with each other with a ringtone at 18 kilohertz, right? Every kid in the class can hear it, but no adult in the class can, right? You've heard that one, right? You've heard that. In fact, even 7-Elevens now in Great Britain are using this phenomenon to scatter away the teenagers in front of the 7-Eleven or chasing away customers because they're just hanging out. So they put these speakers above the doorway that emanate a really high-pitched 19 kilohertz tone, which drives the teenagers nuts. But the old folks just walk right under it. I don't hear a thing. Well, you kids all scared. It must be me. Yeah, you can go away, punks. Grandpa's here. Why? Yep. We don't hear 20 kilohertz much anymore. So when the CD designers came in and said, well, gee, how fast should we make the sampling rate? You don't want to make it too fast because, you know, you got to make a processor that can spit out that many bits that quickly. So you can't make it too ridiculous, but you do have to make it at least twice what you're trying to capture, which would be? Yeah, if you're trying to capture 20K for humans, you're going to need a 40 kilohertz minimum sampling rate. Does anybody know what CD sample rate is? 44 kilohertz. If you don't know this, you need to write this down and memorize it. Okay? It's 44.1 kilohertz. Slightly more than twice the minimum necessity. Now, in any recording equipment, if you go out and buy a recording, a hardware piece of device, go to Sweetwater Sound or up at Guitar Center, you will not be able to buy. They don't even sell anything that will sample at only 44.1. It'll go down that low, sure. But now they sample at twice that, 88.2 and 96K and 192K are common sample rates today. Most recording studios in the pro world are now operating at 192, which is about a little more than 4 times what you would need to capture the signal according to Nyquist. Because as you can see, that's still a pretty crude capturing of the signal. It captures the essence of it, but it's, I would say, not terribly precise. Okay? Now, this comes in real handy when you're trying to compress for data. Okay? If I don't need all that high frequency content and I just need to transmit a human voice, maybe, okay? Human voice, oh gosh, there's nothing in a human speech above much, really, 10 kilohertz. So what would be the minimum sampling rate for human speech? 20K, right? Twice. So I could get away with murder. Instead of sampling it at 44.1, I could sample it at 20K and save slightly more than half the data rate. Right? Half the data rate. Okay? The problem is, I'm cutting off the high frequencies, which I don't need in human speech. What about bass guitar? How many of you want to become video game programmers? Anybody in here consider doing the video game industry? Good. One of the big problems in the video game industry is you got a limited amount of real estate on that DVD. Okay? And you're limited. And guess who wins? Guess who wins the gigabytes on the DVD? What department? Graphics. Graphics and animation. They win almost all. And what does audio have to fight for? That little tiny piece of the pie, right? That's left. So we have to put all our sounds onto that disc and somehow play them back efficiently. And they've got real clever ways of doing it, which I might get into if we have time. Okay? How are we doing anyway? We've got about 50 minutes left.
Yeah, that's into 12:45.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I've got to figure out a way to compress the music onto that DVD so I can have really kick-butt music along with all those polygons, right? To create an experience that draws you back into the game so that you buy version 2, right? That's what it's all about, okay? So now I'm going to demonstrate to you different types of music. Again, the same pieces, except this time sampled at different sampling rates, okay? I'm going to put on the board what those sampling rates are going to be. The first one, I came right off the CD at 44.1 kilohertz. And it sounds, oh, well, CD quality. That's where that comes from. The next one I'm going to sample is at 22 kilohertz, 22.05. Okay? In the real world, this means 20K is reproduced. CD quality. Okay? In this one, that means only 11K is produced. So that's like FM radio, kind of. And the next one, I drop it down to 11K. Oh. So what's the theoretical frequency response? Huh? 5.5K. Wow. That sounds like an AM radio to us. And the last one I drop you down to is 8K, 8 kilohertz sampling rate. Okay? What is that going to be over here? 4K, which is what? Maybe as good as your cell phone. Because what? Cell phones sound crappier every year. Have you noticed that? They're selling off your bandwidth for what? Talk time. Right? They sell infinite talk time and everybody's yapping on those phones. They got to rob the bandwidth to fit it in the channels. So they squished it down from 4 kilohertz to 3.5 to 3. You ever notice how you can't tell your S's from F's anymore on someone talking on a cell phone? Because you need the S's up at 5.5K to hear it, and then F is at 4K, is at 5.5. And when you lose that 5.5, you can't tell S's from F's anymore. Okay? That was a problem with Edison back in 1908. When he came out with these nice blue Amberols in 1912, he claimed, you can hear the S's now. Isn't it interesting? 100 years later, we go back 100 years. Your cell phone sucks worse than this iPod.